Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the sky turns grey not just outside, but within. We face illnesses, losses, betrayals, failures, and in those times it's easy to ask, where is God in all this? And perhaps even more painfully, why has he not changed it? But I want to ask you something today that may sound strange at first. What if the very difficulty you are praying to escape is the very place where peace begins? You see, we often think of peace as something waiting on the other side of our problems. We say, if only this situation would end, if only this pain would pass, then I'd be at peace. But peace is not a reward for the storm's passing. It is a gift God offers in the middle of it. And this peace isn't soft or vague. It isn't simply pretending everything is okay. True peace is forged in fire. It is the quiet confidence that even when everything falls apart, there is one who holds it all together. Let me say something difficult but honest. Comfort rarely changes us. Ease rarely teaches us. But suffering has a way of stripping away illusions. It shows us what we've really built our lives on. And when we discover that we've been leaning on things that crumble, money, reputation, even relationships, then we're finally ready to lean on something unshakable. God does not always remove the fire, but he joins us in it. Just as light doesn't eliminate darkness by fleeing it, but by entering it, so God enters into our deepest sorrows to offer peace that doesn't depend on external change, but internal transformation. Have you ever noticed that the most peaceful people are not those with the easiest lives, but those who have suffered deeply and found meaning in that suffering? That's no accident. Peace is not the fruit of perfect circumstances. It is the fruit of trust. Trust that there is more going on than you can see. Trust that God is at work, even in silence, even in stillness. And so, I challenge you today, stop waiting for your storm to end before you begin to live. Look for God not beyond your pain, but within it. He may not change your situation overnight, but he will change you through it, and that change will become your peace. You may not have asked for this difficult road, but perhaps, just perhaps, it is on this road that you will discover what comfort never could. That peace is not found when everything goes right, but when you discover that you are held, even when everything goes wrong. Pain is not pointless, and yet that is exactly what it feels like in the thick of it, when you're lying awake at night, replaying the conversation that broke your heart, when you've tried everything, and the situation remains unchanged. When you're praying and heaven is silent, in those moments, pain feels like pure loss, like something is being taken from you, and nothing is being given in return. But pain is rarely as empty as it seems. The truth is, pain often becomes the very ground where clarity grows. It's strange, isn't it, that when things are going well, we rarely question what we're doing or why we're doing it. We float, we assume. We settle, but when suffering strikes, it disrupts that surface calm. It forces questions to the front that we'd otherwise bury. Who am I without this job? What do I believe when life doesn't go my way? What is actually worth holding on to? These are not questions that comfort usually invites. They are questions born in the silence of pain, in the ache of loneliness, in the despair of a closed door. And yet, they are the questions that lead to a deeper life. There is a certain kind of strength that only grows in adversity, not because adversity is good in itself, but because it exposes the truth. Pain reveals our hidden attachments. We often discover too late that we've placed our identity in fragile places in a title, a relationship, an image we project. When those are shaken, pain tears off the mask. It shows us who we really are. And while that is terrifying, it is also liberating, because you cannot heal what you will not face. Consider how the muscles of the body grow stronger, not through rest, but through resistance. The weight that strains you is the weight that shapes you. Likewise, the emotional and spiritual strain of hardship, if we do not run from it, becomes a force that stretches us, sharpens us, and ultimately strengthens us. That doesn't mean we go looking for pain. No one should. But it does mean that when it comes, we don't have to fear that it is meaningless. Many people will tell you to avoid pain at all costs, to numb it, ignore it, or rush through it. But if we do that, we miss the gold buried in the dark. Pain, when listened to rather than escaped, becomes a teacher, a mirror, sometimes even a friend, not a friend who soothes, but one who speaks the truth we've been too distracted to hear. Pain teaches humility because it shows us we are not in control. It teaches compassion because it reminds us that others hurt too. And it teaches resilience because it proves that we can endure more than we thought possible. And yet, pain is not only about what it teaches. It's also about what it reveals. It reveals where we've been trusting in things that can be taken away. And in that way, it invites us to build on something eternal, on something that suffering cannot touch. Pain draws a line between what is temporary and what is lasting, between the visible and the invisible, between what merely comforts us and what truly sustains us. And in that tension, something deep happens, a quiet shift from shallow belief to lived faith. So no, pain is not pointless. It is not punishment, and it is not abandonment. It is often preparation. It does not mean that God has stopped working. It may mean that He is working more deeply than ever before. Like roots growing in darkness, some of the most important changes in your life will happen in the seasons where nothing seems to be happening at all. But if you wait, and you listen, and you trust, you will see that this pain has a purpose. Not a cruel one, not an arbitrary one, but a redemptive one. And in time, even this pain, the one you never wanted, may become the beginning of a peace you never imagined. Once we begin to understand that pain is not pointless, that it holds the potential for deep transformation, the next question naturally arises. Then what should we expect from God in our suffering? We often assume that if God truly cares, He will take away the hardship. That peace will come when the trial ends, when the illness is cured, the door opens, the situation resolves. But over time, and often reluctantly, we come to realize something more profound. God's peace is not found in the removal of trouble, but in His presence within it. This is not an abstract or poetic idea. It's a reality that people living through deep pain experience again and again. When all external comforts are stripped away, what remains is not a blank emptiness, not if we are willing to lean in. What remains is the quiet, steady whisper of a God who does not walk away when the storm begins. He is not standing on the other side of your suffering, waiting for you to get through it and meet Him there. He is already in it, beside you, even if it doesn't always feel that way. And this changes everything, because it means peace is not postponed. It is not something you must wait to feel once everything is back to normal. If peace were only available in calm conditions, then it would always be fragile, always dependent on our circumstances behaving. But true peace, the kind God gives, is independent of your situation. It is not rooted in what's happening around you, but in who is with you in it. Look around and you'll see examples everywhere. A mother with a terminal illness who radiates calm. A man going through financial ruin, yet still speaks with gratitude. A young woman grieving the loss of a parent, and yet somehow still showing up with compassion for others. These aren't stories of denial or people putting on masks. These are the testimonies of those who have encountered something, or rather, someone greater than their pain. They haven't escaped trouble, they've discovered presence in the midst of it. This doesn't mean we feel peace all the time. It doesn't mean we won't cry, or question, or wrestle with despair. God's peace doesn't cancel our humanity, it deepens it. It gives space for both lament and hope to exist together. In fact, peace is often felt most deeply when we are honest about our struggle. The more real we are with our pain, the more room we make to receive the reality of His nearness. Many people are looking for peace in the form of escape. Change the job, change the relationship, move cities, distract yourself, numb yourself. And while some changes can be wise and necessary, external shifts will never bring internal stillness unless we have learned how to meet God where we are, because trouble will follow us in different shapes. Life by its very nature involves suffering, so unless we learn to find peace in the valley, we will always be waiting for peace to arrive later, and that later will never fully come. There's something sacred about the kind of peace that shows up in the fire. It doesn't make headlines, it doesn't announce itself with a trumpet, it's not loud, it is often quiet like a deep breath in the middle of a panic, a sudden moment of clarity in confusion, or the feeling of being held when you're about to fall apart. That kind of peace doesn't come from logic. It doesn't even always make emotional sense. It's a gift, and the beauty is, it does not rely on us having all the answers. In fact, it often arrives precisely when we've let go of our desperate need to control everything. When we stop saying, "I need this to be fixed," and start praying, "God, just be near," that's when something shifts. Because peace is not a transaction, it's not God saying, "If you do this, I'll give you calm." It's relational. It's the effect of knowing you are not abandoned, not unseen, not unloved even when the situation stays messy. And so, as we face life's difficulties, we can stop waiting for the storm to pass before we breathe again. We can begin to ask, not "When will this end?" but "How can I meet God here?" And in that meeting, we will find that His peace is not a promise for a perfect future, it is a presence for this imperfect moment. If God's peace is truly present amid the storm, and not only after it, then the next truth becomes even clearer. Faith is not a product of ease, it is forged in difficulty. And this is something we all intuitively know, though we often resist it. We admire people with deep faith, unshakable character, and unbreakable trust in God, but if we look closely at their stories, they usually have one thing in common: they've suffered, they've walked through fire, not just read about it. They've lived their faith when it cost them something, not just when it was convenient. We often speak about faith as if it were something soft and gentle, a peaceful feeling, or a kind of quiet certainty. But in reality, real faith is forged in tension. It's not built in the safety of comfort. It's hammered out in the moments when everything we see and feel seems to contradict what we believe. Faith begins where human understanding ends. And that boundary is only truly tested in adversity. Think about it. When life is going well, when our health is stable, our relationships are smooth, our goals are being met, we may say we trust God. But often we're not really trusting, we're just comfortable. Comfort can mimic faith, but it doesn't test it, it doesn't stretch it, it doesn't deepen it. True faith is formed when comfort is removed, when prayers go unanswered for a season, when the outcomes don't match our expectations. It is in those moments, when we have every reason to give up, that we discover what we really believe. This is why some of the strongest faith you'll ever witness comes from people who have lost what others fear losing: health, loved ones, careers, dreams, and somehow still stand. Not because they didn't grieve or struggle or doubt, but because in the midst of all that they clung to something beyond themselves. They didn't simply talk about faith, they lived it, they fought for it. And it became real, not as a theory, but as a lifeline. Difficulty has a way of forcing our faith out of the realm of theory and into the rawness of experience. When everything is stripped away, we're left asking the essential question: is God enough? Not is He helpful, is He nice, is He beneficial, but is He enough? And answering that question is what begins to forge faith like steel. It's the kind of faith that doesn't break when life does. Forging implies heat. Pressure, friction, these are not comfortable things, but they are necessary. Just as a blacksmith uses fire and blows from a hammer to shape metal into something strong and purposeful, so too are our lives shaped in seasons of intensity. No one escapes this process, but those who surrender to it not with passivity, but with trust find that what emerges on the other side is not just survival, but substance, and it's important to understand that faith forged in difficulty is not always loud. It doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like simply showing up when you want to disappear. Sometimes it's praying when you don't feel anything, or continuing to believe when everything screams that you shouldn't. It's that quiet choice to say, I will not give up, even though I don't understand, and that choice repeated over time builds something inside of you that cannot be manufactured by success or ease. It is also through difficulty that we begin to realize the difference between believing in God and actually depending on Him. Belief is often passive. It exists until tested, but dependence is active. It means leaning, trusting, surrendering not because we've lost our strength, but because we've come to realize we were never meant to carry the weight alone. God allows difficulties not to crush us, but to strip away our illusions of control and to reveal the only foundation worth building on. As this process unfolds, a strange thing happens. Faith becomes less about having the right answers and more about knowing the right presence. It shifts from confidence in outcomes to confidence in God's character. We begin to say, even if I don't get what I want, I still trust you. And that kind of faith is not weak. It is the strongest kind there is. So when life grows hard, when the walls close in, when nothing makes sense, remember that your faith is not failing just because you're struggling. It may in fact be forming, because faith is not the absence of questions. It's the decision to believe while you're still asking them. It is not forged in the sunlight of ease, but in the midnight of difficulty where, somehow, against all odds, we discover a God who is still good. If faith is truly forged in difficulty, then it makes sense that much of what God is doing in us and around us is not always immediately visible. This brings us to a humbling and often uncomfortable truth. God often works behind the curtain, not in the spotlight. His deepest work is not always public, loud, or instantly understood. It's quiet, it's subtle, it often unfolds in ways that only make sense in hindsight, if they ever fully make sense at all. This is perhaps one of the greatest tensions of faith, that we are called to trust a God whose most important work is usually hidden. We want dramatic answers, immediate changes, clear signs, but God tends to work in rhythms that are patient, long-term, and quiet. While we look for fireworks, He is often planting seeds. While we wait for a door to swing open, He's strengthening our character in the hallway. While we ask for relief, He's preparing resilience. And this is not because God enjoys being mysterious. It's because growth requires a hidden place. Just as seeds germinate in the dark soil before breaking the surface, so our lives are being shaped long before the results are visible. The unseen groundwork, the quiet decisions to keep going, the choice to forgive, the silent prayers whispered through tears, these are the places where transformation truly happens. But because they don't make noise, we sometimes think nothing's happening. We are conditioned by our culture to equate visibility with value. If it's not seen, if it's not posted, if it's not applauded, it must not matter. But the way of God is different. He treasures the hidden place. He does His finest work in silence. Think of the caterpillar in the cocoon from the outside. It appears motionless, but inside, an entire transformation is underway. So it is with our seasons of waiting, struggle, and silence. Just because we can't see movement doesn't mean there isn't any. It's in these hidden seasons that our faith is most challenged. When prayers seem unanswered, when there's no confirmation, When everything looks the same day after day, this is when many begin to doubt. Is God even doing anything? Does he see me? Has he forgotten me? These are the real questions that rise when the spotlight dims. And yet, this is also the very soil in which spiritual maturity begins to grow. In fact, there is a kind of strength that can only be developed in the unseen. The spotlight can often feed pride. Visible results can tempt us to tie our identity to outcomes, but in the hidden place, there is no one to impress, only God to trust. And that trust, practiced daily without applause, is what forms integrity. It's what makes faith real, not performative, not circumstantial, but rooted. It's also worth noting that many of the prayers God answers are answered in stages, not all at once. But because we are so focused on the dramatic moment, the big break, we often miss the evidence of his hand in the little things, a conversation that softens your heart, a delay that protects you, a closed door that leads you to a better one. These aren't accidents. They are brushstrokes in a masterpiece we're not yet allowed to see fully. And this hidden work of God is not just something that happens to us, it happens in us. While we're asking God to change our situation, he's often changing our hearts, teaching us patience, deepening our empathy, breaking down pride, strengthening endurance. These are not always visible shifts, but they are the foundations of a life that can withstand both success and suffering. And eventually, they become visible in ways we never expected. Of course, this doesn't mean we'll never see results. There are times when the curtain does lift, when clarity comes, when prayers are answered in ways that leave us speechless. But those moments are not the beginning of God's work. They are the fruit of what was happening all along, behind the scenes. The spotlight moments are real, but they are built on 1,000 hidden choices, 1,000 silent mercies. So when you feel unseen, unheard, or uncertain, remember, the absence of noise is not the absence of God. His silence is not the same as his inactivity. He is still working in the layers, in the depths, in the places no one else sees. And it's often there, in the quiet shaping behind the curtain, that the most lasting peace is born. When we begin to understand that God often works in hidden, quiet ways behind the curtain rather than under the spotlight, it prepares our hearts for a truth that is even more difficult to embrace. What feels like an ending may, in fact, be a divine beginning. And the reason this truth is so hard to accept is because endings are painful. They are final. They leave us grieving, uncertain, and often without answers. We experience a breakup, a job loss, a health crisis, the death of a loved one, or the collapse of a long-held dream, and our first instinct is to believe that something has been taken from us. We rarely think that something is being given in that moment. That's because, from a human perspective, endings represent failure or loss. We define our lives by chapters, and when one closes, especially unexpectedly, we often assume the story is over. But God does not write the way we do. What we call the end of the road, he may call a redirection. What looks to us like a breaking point might, to him, be a turning point. And this is only something we can begin to see when we stop looking at our circumstances in isolation and begin to trust that even the collapse has meaning. This does not make the pain disappear. Endings still hurt. There is real grief in letting go of something you hoped would last, a relationship you poured yourself into, a career you built over years, a version of the future you prayed for. It is okay to mourn what didn't happen. It is okay to cry over what was lost. Faith does not deny reality. It learns to walk through it with open hands. And in that walking, in that surrender, we begin to notice that the very ground we thought was barren may start to grow something new. One of the reasons we often miss divine beginnings is because they rarely look like we imagined. We expect resurrection to come with celebration, but it often starts with silence. A new beginning may first feel like obscurity, weakness, or confusion. It may feel smaller than the thing we lost. It may feel unimpressive, but God doesn't build with showmanship. He builds with purpose. And sometimes the most significant things He's doing in your life start as quiet seeds, not loud announcements. Think of the many stories both in Scripture and in real life where an apparent ending was only the beginning of a greater purpose. Joseph being thrown into a pit and sold into slavery felt like an ending, but it was the beginning of a journey that would save nations. Ruth losing her husband felt like an ending, but it was the start of a redemption story that would link her to the lineage of kings. Over and over, we see this pattern. What looks like devastation often conceals destiny. And yet, when you're in the middle of the ending, you don't see the full picture. That's where trust is tested. That's where faith asks you to keep walking, even when you don't know where the path leads. Because in that movement, however hesitant, however slow, we give God room to lead us to something we never would have chosen, but deeply need. Endings strip us down to dependence. And it is often in that raw, uncertain place that we finally become ready for the kind of transformation ease could never offer. Sometimes we cling so tightly to what's ending that we don't realize it's already over. We pray for restoration when God is preparing a rebirth. We beg Him to fix what's broken, unaware that He is trying to build something entirely new. And that new thing, even if it seems smaller at first, may be truer, deeper, and more aligned with His purposes than anything we could have asked for. Divine beginnings do not erase the pain of endings, but they do redeem it. They give the ending context. They take what the enemy meant for harm and turn it into a foundation for growth. And while we may not understand it right away, while we may go months or years before we see it, we begin to live with the awareness that nothing is wasted, that even endings carry purpose, that even ashes can lead to beauty, though the timeline may be longer than we would prefer. So when you find yourself at the edge of what feels like the end of a chapter, a dream, a certainty, dare to believe that this, too, may be the start of something sacred, because the God who works behind the curtain is also the one who writes new chapters with broken pens. And He is not finished with your story. When we finally begin to see that what felt like an ending may in fact be the beginning of something greater, our understanding of peace begins to change too. We stop chasing peace as a prize we'll receive after life makes sense again, and we start to understand that true peace doesn't always come with clarity or comfort. It doesn't depend on what's happening around us. It's something deeper, something internal. It's not a change in circumstance, but a transformation of the soul. This is perhaps one of the hardest truths to grasp, because our natural instinct is to link peace to external resolution. We want peace to mean the pain has stopped, the situation has improved, the relationship has healed, the outcome has turned in our favor, and yes, those things do bring relief, but they don't create the kind of peace that lasts. Because what happens when the next storm comes? What happens when the next challenge surfaces? If our peace is always tied to perfect conditions, we will spend our entire lives trying to control things we were never meant to control. That's why the transformation God offers isn't just about changing the scenery, it's about changing us. It's about forming in us a kind of stillness that can hold steady, even when everything around us shifts. A stillness that isn't passive or numb, but grounded in truth, grounded in presence, grounded in the quiet but unwavering belief that we are not alone, not abandoned, not forgotten even when we cannot feel it. And this kind of transformation often begins in the very moments we would rather escape, the days we feel lost, broken, or numb, the nights filled with unanswered questions. These are not detours from peace, they are the soil where peace begins to grow. Because in those moments we come to the end of ourselves. We stop relying on temporary fixes, surface-level comforts, or the illusion that we're in control. And when all that falls away, we are finally open to something real. This transformation of the soul is slow. It doesn't come through one powerful prayer or one inspirational quote. It comes through time, through surrender, through choosing again and again to believe that God is doing something in us, even when nothing seems to be changing around us. And over time, we begin to notice it, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet shift. The thing that used to break us doesn't have the same power. The fear that once paralyzed us has less control. The restlessness that used to drive us begins to quiet. It's important to understand that peace is not the absence of emotion. It's not pretending we're okay when we're not. In fact, the most authentic peace often exists alongside grief, fear, and uncertainty. Peace is not the elimination of these feelings, it's the ability to hold them without being ruled by them, to feel pain without becoming bitter, to carry sorrow without losing hope, to face the unknown with a heart that is anchored. And that anchoring doesn't come from logic. It comes from a relationship, from knowing, even if imperfectly, that God is with us, not just in the good times, but in the chaos, in the confusion, in the aftermath of every ending. That's where transformation takes place, not just in what we learn, but in who we become. We move from being people who need everything to be right in order to feel peace, to being people who can walk through the fire and still say, "It is well with my soul." This kind of peace isn't loud. It won't always be visible to others. You may still cry, you may still struggle, but inside there will be a rootedness, a deep sense that your soul is being held not by answers, not by outcomes, but by a God who is working all things, even the hardest things, for a purpose beyond what you can see. That transformation will not erase all your questions, but it will give you the strength to live with them. And as you begin to live from that place, not just reacting to circumstances, but resting in the presence of God, you'll discover a peace that doesn't just visit you temporarily. It stays, not because life got easier, but because you got deeper, not because the storm stopped, but because your soul found an anchor that holds even when the waves rise.